In a small coastal town where the ocean kissed the shore and the salty breeze carried whispers of adventure, there lived a man who loved nothing more than being out on the water. This guy wasn't rich or famous. He was just an ordinary person with an extraordinary passion for boating. His name? Let's call him Alex. Alex had spent years saving up to buy his little fishing boat, the kind that could take him far enough into the sea to catch dinner, but still fit snugly in the local. Marina. Alex lived in a gated community nestled along the coastline. It was one of those neighborhoods where every house looked picture perfect, with manicured lawns and freshly painted fences. The place was run by a homeowners association, HOA, which prided itself on keeping everything neat and tidy. They had rules about almost everything: what color you could paint your front door, how tall your grass could grow, even whether you could hang laundry outside. Most people didn't mind these rules because they kept the neighborhood looking nice. But Alex? Well, he always marched to the beat of his own drum. One sunny morning, as Alex sipped his coffee while gazing out at the marina, a letter arrived. In his mailbox. He opened it casually, expecting another reminder about trash pickup days or maybe an invitation to the annual block party. Instead, what he read made his blood boil. The HOA was ordering him to remove his beloved boat from the marina. Their reason? It detracted from the neighborhood's visual harmony. Visual harmony? Alex couldn't believe what he was reading. Sure, his boat wasn't some shiny yacht with chrome finishes, but it was functional, well-maintained, and, most importantly, it meant the world to him. The kicker? The marina wasn't even part of the HOA's property. It belonged to the city. So why did they think they had any say over it? When Alex dug deeper, he discovered something unsettling. While the marina itself wasn't theirs, the access road leading to it was leased to the HOA through a private agreement with the city. That gave them control over who got in and out. Technically, they weren't wrong to care about how things looked, but telling someone to get rid of their boat felt like crossing a line. For days, Alex stewed over the letter. He knew plenty of other residents kept boats at the marina, so why single him out? Was it jealousy? Or maybe someone on the HOA board simply didn't like him. Whatever the reason, Alex decided right then and there that he wouldn't back down. Removing his boat wasn't just inconvenient, it felt like surrendering a piece of himself. And Alex wasn't the type to roll over without a fight. As weeks went by, the HOA sent follow-up notices, each one firmer than the last. First came polite reminders, then stern warnings, and finally threats of fines and legal action. But Alex didn't budge. Every time they pushed, he pushed back harder. He started attending HOA meetings, speaking up whenever he got the chance. At first, people listened politely, nodding along as if humoring him. But when it became clear that Alex wasn't going away quietly, patience wore thin. Some neighbors whispered behind his back, calling him stubborn or unreasonable. Others admired his guts, secretly rooting for him even if they wouldn't admit it publicly. What no one realized yet was that this seemingly minor disagreement was about to spiral into something much bigger. For Alex, it wasn't just about the boat anymore. It was about standing up to authority, fighting for fairness, and proving that sometimes bending the rules is worth it. Little did anyone know, Alex was already cooking up a plan, one that would leave the entire community talking for months to come. The stage was set. On one side stood the HOA, determined to enforce their vision of perfection. On the other stood Alex, ready to defend not only his boat but also his principles. Neither side was willing to give in, and as tensions continued to rise, the calm waters of the marina were about to turn choppy. What happened next would go down in local legend, a story of rebellion, ingenuity, and unexpected consequences. As the days stretched into weeks, the HOS patience began to wear thin. They had sent polite reminders, stern warnings, and even legal threats, but Alex wasn't budging. Every time they tried to pressure him, he stood his ground, calm and uncheckable. To the HOA board members, this felt like a slap in the face. How dare one person defy their authority? Didn't he understand that rules were there for a reason? But to Alex, it wasn't about breaking rules. It was about challenging what he saw as unfairness. Things came to a head during one of the HOA's monthly meetings. These gatherings were usually dull affairs, discussions about landscaping budgets, noise complaints, or who forgot to close their garage door overnight. But this meeting was different. The room buzzed with tension as residents filed in, curious to see how the boat issue would play out. Some came to support Alex, others to criticize him, and a few just wanted entertainment. When Alex walked in, all eyes turned to him. He didn't look nervous. Instead, he carried himself with quiet confidence. As the discussion began, the HOA president laid out their case again. This isn't personal. It's about maintaining standards. We can't have random boats cluttering up the marina when it reflects poorly on our community. A murmur rippled through the crowd. One resident chimed in saying, "But the marina isn't even part of our property. Why are we policing it?" Another countered, "Because we're the ones using it the most. If it looks bad, it affects us." Alex listened silently, letting them talk themselves in circles. When it was finally his turn to speak, he leaned forward and said, "You want me to move my boat because it detracts from visual harmony. Fine, but let's be clear. This isn't about aesthetics. This is about control. You don't like that I'm not following your script, so you're trying to punish me for it." His words hit like a punch. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to applaud or argue. After the meeting ended without resolution, Alex went home, his mind racing. He knew the HOA wouldn't back down easily. They thrived on enforcing rules no matter how petty. And now, thanks to the heated exchange at the meeting, they probably saw him as more than just a nuisance. They saw him as a threat. That realization sparked an idea in Alex's head. What if he could turn the tables on them? What if he could show them exactly how it felt to lose something they valued? The next morning, Alex woke up early, his plan already taking shape. He called around to local hardware stores, asking about fencing materials. By noon, trucks were pulling into the marina parking lot, loaded with rolls of chain-link fence, posts, and tools. Neighbors watched curiously as workers started assembling the fence, encircling the entire marina. Within hours, the once open waterfront was completely blocked off. Signs reading "Private Property, No Trespassing" were hung at every entrance. When news of the blockade spread, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Residents flocked to the scene, staring in disbelief at the towering fence. "What is this?" someone shouted. "Who does he think he is?" Another demanded. For many, this wasn't just inconvenient, it was infuriating. The marina wasn't just a place to dock boats, it was a lifeline. Parents used it to teach their kids how to sail. Retirees spent hours fishing off the docks. Even tourists visited regularly, bringing business to local shops and restaurants. Now all of that was cut off. The HOA scrambled to respond. Lawyers were called, emergency emails blasted out, and urgent phone calls made. But Alex remained unfazed. When confronted by angry neighbors, he simply shrugged and said, "You wanted my boat gone? Fine. Now no one gets to use the marina until you leave me alone." His logic was maddeningly simple, and that's what made it so effective. By fencing off the marina, he hadn't just retaliated against the HOA, he'd exposed their hypocrisy. They claimed to care about the marina, yet they only seemed bothered when it benefited them personally. Tensions escalated quickly. Arguments broke out among neighbors, some siding with Alex and others furious at him. Social media lit up with posts debating the situation. Photos of the fenced-off marina went viral, drawing attention from nearby towns. Local reporters arrived, eager to cover the story. One journalist asked Alex point-blank, "Do you think this is fair? Aren't you punishing innocent people?" Alex paused before answering, "I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I'm just showing them what happens when you abuse power." Despite the backlash, Alex refused to budge. The fence stayed up and life in the community ground to a halt. Boats sat idle in their slips, gathering dust. Kayaks and paddleboards leaned against walls, unused. Businesses that relied on tourism reported steep drops in revenue. Even the HOA board members, who had initially been smug about their position, began to feel the heat. Their phones rang nonstop with complaints from frustrated residents demanding answers. Behind closed doors, cracks started forming within the HOA. Board members argued over how to handle the situation. Some wanted to take legal action immediately, while others suggested negotiating with Alex. Tempers flared. Alliances shifted, and the once united front crumbled under the weight of public pressure. Meanwhile, Alex kept a low profile, watching events unfold from afar. He knew he couldn't keep the fence up forever, but he also knew he had struck a nerve dot as the standoff dragged on. Emotions ran high. Some neighbors accused Alex of being selfish and vindictive, while others praised him for standing up to the HOA's authoritarian ways. Conversations at coffee shops and grocery stores revolved around the same question: who was really in the wrong here? Was it Alex for causing such chaos? Or was it the HOA for pushing things too far? Amid the turmoil, one thing became clear. Alex's actions had ignited a much larger conversation about power, fairness, and community. People who had never given the HOA a second thought were now questioning its role in their lives. Longtime residents found themselves reevaluating their priorities, wondering if the pursuit of visual harmony was worth sacrificing individual freedoms. And Alex, despite the stress and scrutiny, felt a strange sense of satisfaction. For the first time, people were paying attention not just to him, but to the bigger issues at play. But as satisfying as it was to see the HOA squirm, Alex couldn't ignore the toll the situation was taking on him. Legal fees were piling up, and the constant confrontation was exhausting. More than anything, though, he missed the camaraderie of the marina. Before all this, he'd enjoyed chatting with fellow boaters, sharing tips and stories. Now, those relationships felt strained, if not broken entirely. It was a lonely feeling, and it made him wonder if he'd pushed things too far. Still, Alex held firm. He believed in his cause, even if it meant enduring criticism and isolation. Deep down, he hoped the HOA would come to its senses, that they'd realize the damage their rigid rules were causing and offer a compromise. Until then, the fence would stay up, a stark reminder of what happened when people refused to listen. As the days turned into weeks, the fence around the marina became more than just a physical barrier, it became a symbol of division. The once peaceful neighborhood was now split down the middle, with tempers flaring and friendships crumbling under the weight of conflicting opinions. Some residents praised Alex for standing up to the HOA's overreach, while others branded him reckless and selfish. Conversations that used to revolve around weekend plans or gardening tips had devolved into heated arguments about fairness, authority, and who exactly deserved to use the marina. For those directly affected by the blockade, life felt like it had been turned upside down. Parents complained they couldn't take their kids out on the water anymore. Retirees lamented missing their morning fishing trips, which had become cherished rituals. Even local businesses suffered as tourists stopped coming, deterred by the sight of the imposing fence. One shop owner, whose bait and tackle store relied heavily on marina traffic, posted a sign in his window. "Thanks, HOA and Alex. My bills don't care about your drama." It summed up the frustration shared by many. HOA, meanwhile, found itself in an increasingly precarious position. At first, board members had been confident they could strong-arm Alex into compliance. After all, rules were rules, right? But now, faced with mounting public backlash and financial losses, cracks began to show within their ranks. During emergency meetings, voices were raised, accusations flew, and fingers were pointed. Some members argued for doubling down a lawsuit perhaps, or involving law enforcement. Others suggested a softer approach, urging compromise before things spiraled further out of control. Outside these closed-door sessions, HOA leaders tried to project calm, assuring residents they were handling the situation responsibly. But behind the polished statements lay chaos. Board members avoided eye contact at community events, knowing full well they were losing credibility. Neighbors whispered about resignations and secret disagreements, fueling speculation about whether the HOA could survive this debacle intact. Alex, for his part, remained steadfast but not untouched. While he refused to back down publicly, privately, the toll of the standoff weighed heavily on him. Legal fees continued to pile up, eating into savings he'd worked hard to build. Late-night phone calls from reporters asking for comments left him drained. And then there was the loneliness, the slow erosion of relationships with people he'd once called friends. Many neighbors avoided him altogether, unwilling to risk being associated with the troublemaker. Others shot him icy glares whenever they passed him in the street. Despite the isolation, Alex drew strength from unexpected places. Strangers who heard about his story reached out online, offering words of encouragement or sharing similar experiences of battling overbearing HOAs. Some even sent donations to help cover his legal costs. These small acts of kindness reminded him he wasn't entirely alone. Still, the strain grew harder to ignore. One evening, after another long day of dodging hostile questions from neighbors, Alex sat on his porch staring at the ocean. He thought about how much he missed the simple joy of taking his boat out without drama, without politics, without fences. For the first time since the blockade began, doubt crept in. Was this fight really worth it? Meanwhile, the media frenzy surrounding the story showed no signs of slowing down. Local news outlets couldn't get enough of the bizarre saga, dubbing it everything from Marina Gate to the Great Fence fiasco. Reporters camped out near the marina, shoving microphones into the faces of bewildered residents. Social media exploded with memes mocking both sides' photoshopped images of Alex wearing a captain's hat and wielding a chainsaw, or caricatures of HOA board members clutching clipboards while glaring disapprovingly at boats. Hashtags like #FreeTheMarina and #RulesAreRules trended locally, sparking debates that ranged from lighthearted banter to outright vitriol. Amid the noise, however, some voices began calling for reason. A retired teacher who lived in the community stepped forward, urging both sides to find common ground. She stood outside the fenced-off marina one afternoon, addressing a small crowd of curious neighbors. "We're all losing here," she said firmly. "This isn't about one man's boat or the HOAS rules. This is about us, our community, and how we treat each other when we disagree. Can't we sit down and figure this out together?" Her words resonated with some but fell flat with others. Hardliners on both sides dismissed her plea as naive, insisting compromise was impossible. Yet, for a handful of residents weary of the endless conflict, her message struck a chord. Slowly, quietly, a movement toward reconciliation began to take shape. A few brave souls started reaching out to Alex, offering to mediate talks between him and the HOA. Initially skeptical, Alex eventually agreed to meet, but only if the HOA came prepared to listen, not lecture. When the first tentative discussions finally took place, tension still ran high. Old grievances surfaced, accusations flew, and progress seemed painfully slow. But something remarkable happened during those meetings. People started listening, not just hearing, but truly understanding where the other side was coming from. Alex explained how the HOA's demands had felt dismissive and unfair, reducing his cherished boat to nothing more than an eyesore. In turn, HOA representatives acknowledged their initial response had been heavy-handed, admitting they hadn't fully considered the impact of their actions. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't quick. Agreements were drafted, torn apart, and rewritten multiple times. Compromises were proposed, rejected, and revisited. But inch by inch, the two sides inched closer to resolution. Along the way, something surprising emerged: empathy. Residents who had vilified Alex began to see him not as a troublemaker, but as someone fighting for what mattered to him. Likewise, Alex realized the HOA wasn't a faceless enemy, but a group of people trying, albeit imperfectly, to balance competing interests. By the time a tentative agreement was reached, the community had changed in subtle yet profound ways. Fence came down and the marina reopened to cheers from relieved residents. Alex kept his boat, albeit with minor modifications to make it blend better with the surroundings. More importantly, the HOA promised to involve community input before making future decisions affecting shared spaces. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As life slowly returned to normal, people reflected on what they'd learned. Friendships that had fractured began to mend, though scars remained. Conversations shifted from blame to hope, focusing on how to prevent such conflicts in the future. For Alex, the experience left a lasting mark. He emerged stronger, wiser, and more aware of the power of standing up for oneself, but also of the importance of finding balance. And as he launched his boat into the sparkling waters once again, he couldn't help but smile. The battle had been tough, but in its own messy, chaotic way, it had brought the community closer together. The fence around the marina had been up for nearly a month, and by now, it felt like a permanent fixture in everyone's lives. The shiny newness of the chain-link barrier had dulled under layers of grime and frustration. What started as a bold act of defiance from Alex was now a daily reminder of how deeply divided the community had become. Neighbors who once greeted each other warmly now exchanged awkward nods or worse, icy stares. Conversations at the grocery store or park revolved around one topic: the standoff. Some defended Alex's actions, arguing that the HOA had gone too far. Others blamed him entirely, insisting he was selfish for disrupting everyone else's lives. As time dragged on, the cracks in the community grew wider. Friendships that had lasted decades were strained to the breaking point. Take two neighbors, for instance. One supported Alex, believing he was standing up against an overbearing HOA, while the other sided firmly with the board, convinced rules existed for a reason. They used to meet every Saturday morning for coffee and laughter, but now they avoided each other altogether. One day, their kids tried to play together in the cul-de-sac, only to be pulled apart when the parents noticed. "It's better this way," one muttered under her breath, though deep down, she missed the camaraderie. Even within families, tension simmered. A retired couple who lived near the marina found themselves constantly arguing about whose side to take. The husband sympathized with Alex, saying, "He's fighting for something bigger than himself." His wife, however, shook her head. "But look at what it's doing to us, to everyone. We can't even go out on our boat anymore because of him." Their disagreements spilled into dinner conversations, late-night whispers, and tense silences. It wasn't just about boats or fences, it was about values, priorities, and how much people were willing to sacrifice for their beliefs. Amid all this turmoil, local businesses continued to suffer. The bait shop owner put up another sign outside. His store, still open, still struggling. He sat behind the counter most days, scrolling through social media posts about the blockade. Every comment section was a battlefield, with strangers debating whether Alex was a hero or a villain. Some customers came in just to vent, sharing stories of canceled fishing trips or lost reservations. Others stopped coming altogether, unable to face the sight of the empty docks. For Alex, life became both surreal and exhausting. Reporters still called regularly, eager for updates on the saga. Strangers recognized him at gas stations or restaurants, either patting him on the back or giving him disapproving looks. Online, the comments ranged from supportive, "You're showing them who's boss," to vicious, "Hope you lose everything." Each message chipped away at his resolve, leaving him drained and questioning if it was worth it. One evening, after yet another long day of interviews and heated exchanges, Alex sat in his living room staring at photos on the wall. There was one of him and his dad standing proudly beside the boat when he first bought it. Another showed him teaching his nephew how to cast a line during a sunny afternoon at the Marina. These moments weren't just memories, they were part of who he was. The thought of losing that connection to the water gnawed at him. Was holding on to principle worth sacrificing relationships, peace of mind, and maybe even his place in the community? Despite his doubts, Alex refused to give in completely. He knew the HOA wouldn't back down unless they felt real pressure. But privately, he began considering alternatives. Maybe there was a way to end the blockade without losing face or his boat. Around the same time, whispers of compromise started circulating among residents. A few brave souls reached out to Alex, suggesting informal talks with the HOA. At first, he dismissed the idea, thinking it was another attempt to silence him. But as more people approached him, some cautiously, others boldly, he realized they weren't asking him to surrender. They were offering a chance to fix things before the damage became irreparable. On the HOA side, things weren't much better. Board members met almost daily, their discussions growing increasingly frantic. Fines and legal threats hadn't worked, and public opinion was turning against them. Residents openly criticized their handling of the situation, accusing them of prioritizing aesthetics over fairness. Some even threatened to withhold dues or run for seats on the board themselves. Behind closed doors, tempers flared. One member slammed his fist on the table during a meeting, shouting, "We've got to do something before we lose everyone." Another countered, "What do you suggest? Roll over and let him win?" In the midst of this chaos, a surprising figure emerged, a retired teacher who lived in the community. She'd always kept to herself, attending meetings occasionally but rarely speaking up. Now, seeing the damage wrought by the conflict, she decided enough was enough. Standing outside the fenced-off marina one afternoon, she addressed a small crowd of curious neighbors. Her voice trembled slightly, but her words carried weight. "This isn't about one man's boat or the HOA's rules," she said. "It's about us, all of us, and how we treat each other when we disagree. Can't we sit down and figure this out together?" Her plea struck a chord with some, though not everyone agreed. Hardliners on both sides dismissed her as naive. Insisting compromise was impossible. Yet, for those caught in the middle, the ones tired of the endless drama, her message offered hope. Slowly, quietly, a movement toward reconciliation began to take shape. A few brave residents volunteered to mediate talks between Alex and the HOA. Initially skeptical, Alex eventually agreed, but only if the HOA came prepared to listen, not lecture. The first meeting was tense. Old grievances surfaced, accusations flew, and progress seemed painfully slow. But something remarkable happened during those discussions. People started listening, not just hearing, but truly understanding where the other side was coming from. Alex explained how the HOA's demands had felt dismissive and unfair, reducing his cherished boat to nothing more than an eyesore. In turn, HOA representatives acknowledged their initial response had been heavy-handed, admitting they hadn't fully considered the impact of their actions. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't quick. Agreements were drafted, torn apart, and rewritten multiple times. Compromises were proposed, rejected, and revisited. But inch by inch, the two sides inched closer to resolution. Along the way, something surprising emerged: empathy. Residents who had vilified Alex began to see him not as a troublemaker, but as someone fighting for what mattered to him. Likewise, Alex realized the HOA wasn't a faceless enemy, but a group of people trying, albeit imperfectly, to balance competing interests. By the time a tentative agreement was reached, the community had changed in subtle yet profound ways. Fence came down, and the marina reopened to cheers from relieved residents. Alex kept his boat, albeit with minor modifications to make it blend better with the surroundings. More importantly, the HOA promised to involve community input before making future decisions affecting shared spaces. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As life slowly returned to normal, people reflected on what they'd learned. Friendships that had fractured began to mend, though scars remained. Conversations shifted from blame to hope, focusing on how to prevent such conflicts in the future. For Alex, the experience left a lasting mark. He emerged stronger, wiser, and more aware of the power of standing up for oneself, but also of the importance of finding balance. And as he launched his boat into the sparkling waters once again, he couldn't help but smile. The battle had been tough, but in its own messy, chaotic way, it had brought the community closer together. When the fence finally came down, it felt like a weight had been lifted off the entire community. The chains rattled as workers dismantled the barrier piece by piece, revealing the marina once again to sunlight and fresh air. For weeks, the sight of that fence had loomed over everyone, a constant reminder of division, frustration, and stubbornness. Now, as residents gathered to watch its removal, there was an unspoken sense of relief. People clapped politely, some cheered, and others simply stood quietly, taking in the moment. It wasn't just about getting access back to the water. It was about reclaiming a sense of normalcy. Alex stood near the edge of the crowd, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He didn't join in the applause or celebrate loudly. Instead, he watched silently, his expression unreadable. To outsiders, he might have looked indifferent, but inside, he was processing everything: the months of tension, the sleepless nights, the endless arguments. As much as he hated to admit it, pulling down the fence felt like losing a part of himself, not because he wanted the blockade to stay, but because removing it meant letting go of the fight that had defined him for so long. For the HOA, the day marked a quiet victory, too. Board members mingled awkwardly among the crowd, smiling tightly and nodding at neighbors who approached them. They weren't celebrating. They knew they'd come out of this looking bad no matter what, but they were relieved to see the ordeal ending. Some even exchanged brief words with Alex, thanking him for agreeing to compromise. Their tone was polite, almost apologetic, though no one outright admitted fault. Still, the gesture spoke volumes. After months of hostility, even small acts of civility felt monumental. The agreement itself wasn't perfect, but it worked for now. Alex could keep his boat at the marina, provided he made a few changes to make it less conspicuous. The paint, Job was updated, the rust spots patched up, and a new cover installed. None of these adjustments cost him much, but they went a long way toward satisfying the HOA's concerns about visual harmony. In return, the association promised to involve residents more directly in future decisions affecting shared spaces like the marina. It wasn't a revolutionary shift, but it was a start, a sign that maybe, just maybe, they'd learned something from all this. As the days passed, life slowly returned to its rhythm. Boats launched from the docks again, their engines humming. Against the backdrop of waves, parents took their kids out on kayaks, teaching them how to paddle. Retirees resumed their morning fishing trips, swapping stories while waiting for bites. Even local businesses saw a rebound, welcoming tourists who had stayed away during the blockade. At first, things felt fragile, like walking on thin ice. Conversations between neighbors were cautious, peppered with forced smiles and careful phrasing. But over time, the stiffness melted away, replaced by genuine warmth. Still, not everyone forgave Alex immediately or at all. Some neighbors remained bitter, holding on to resentment like a grudge. One woman refused to speak to him when they crossed paths at the marina, muttering under her breath about how selfish he'd been. Another man left passive-aggressive notes on Alex's car windshield, criticizing every little thing he did. These moments stung, but Alex understood where they were coming from. He hadn't exactly gone out of his way to win people over during the standoff. If anything, he'd pushed boundaries and crossed lines, knowing full well it would ruffle feathers. Part of him regretted the collateral damage, but another part couldn't deny that sometimes causing discomfort was necessary to spark change. What surprised Alex most, though, was how many people actually thanked him. Strangers stopped him at the gas station or grocery store, shaking his hand and saying, "You showed us we don't have to roll over just because someone tells us to." Others sent anonymous notes slipped under his door, expressing gratitude for standing up to the HOA. These gestures touched him deeply, reminding him that his actions had resonated beyond his own personal battle. Sure, he'd caused chaos, but he'd also inspired reflection, and that was worth something. As for the HOA, they tried hard to rebuild trust. Board meetings became more transparent, with agendas posted online ahead of time and opportunities for residents to voice concerns. A new committee formed specifically to address issues related to the marina, ensuring decisions wouldn't be made behind closed doors anymore. Some skeptics dismissed these efforts as PR stunts, claiming nothing would really change. But others gave the board credit for trying, acknowledging that growth often starts with baby steps. Months later, the community held a small event to mark the reopening of the marina officially. There were no grand speeches or elaborate ceremonies, just a casual gathering with food trucks, live music, and plenty of laughter. Families spread blankets on the grass while kids chased each other around, shrieking with joy. Volunteers handed out free ice cream cones, and local artists set up booths, selling handmade crafts. The atmosphere was light, almost carefree, as if the shadow of conflict had never existed. During the event, Alex found himself chatting with several neighbors he hadn't spoken to in ages. One older gentleman patted him on the shoulder and said, "You know, I thought you were crazy at first, but now, I think you did us all a favor." Another neighbor, a young mom with 2 toddlers in tow, smiled shyly and admitted, "I used to hate you for blocking the marina, but honestly, you made me realize how much I took it for granted." These conversations floored Alex not because he expected praise, but because they showed how far the community had come since those tense, angry days. By the end of the evening, Alex wandered down to the water's edge, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky blazed orange and pink, casting golden reflections across the surface of the bay. For the first time in months, he felt at peace. The fight had changed him. It had tested his patience, challenged his principles, and forced him to confront parts of himself he hadn't known existed. But it had also taught him valuable lessons about resilience, empathy, and the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. Looking out at the calm waters, Alex realized the real victory wasn't keeping his boat or bringing down the fence. It was seeing his neighbors come together, however imperfectly, to find common ground. The blockade may have started as an act of defiance, but it ended as a catalyst for connection. And as he stood there, listening to the gentle lapping of waves against the dock, he knew one thing for sure. Sometimes the messiest battles lead to the most meaningful resolutions.